up front if you put the patient first. This, in and of itself, is an extreme violation, and the coroner found contributed to his death. The contributory benzodiazepine effect that exacerbated the propofol. Written informed consent, again, required to explain to the patient the risks involved and the benefits involved, the risks and the complications that may ensue is criminal negligence. Charting and documenting all vital records. Again, there wouldn't be so many theories about exactly what happened behind closed doors if it had simply been documented. Conrad Murray was all too willing to record Michael Jackson on May 10th on his iPhone, but not a single piece of paper documenting the dosages, the vital signs, the amount of propofol, the times propofol was given, the times the lorazepam or midazolam or Valium was given. Not one piece of paper. And think about that, because there were medical records for prior time periods. Conrad Murray did have medical records for Michael Jackson in 06 or 07 or 08. He was willing to chart medical records. He was capable of charting medical records. He chose not to keep medical records because he didn't want to document this pharmaceutical experiment he was conducting. And that is what it was. There was no precedence for this. There was no literature to support this. There is a lack of medical records because Conrad Murray chose there to be a lack of medical records, because he did not want to document what he was doing with Mr. Jackson. If nothing else, it reflects on the consciousness of guilt, the knowledge of Conrad Murray of what he was doing to Michael Jackson in this bizarre treatment. But it is criminal negligence either way. The 911 call. Again, you learn this as children. This is basic common sense. The first thing you do. Now, Conrad Murray, as a doctor, should have assessed the patient. He should have quickly assessed the patient, seen what's going on, and called 911. We know he's capable of making a phone call. If he wants to say it was, he couldn't do it at the same time, then you put it on speakerphone. But we know at 12:12 he made a phone call and did not ask for 911. This is bizarre behavior from anyone, let alone a doctor. This extreme criminal negligence. We talked about the doctor-patient relationship and how this was not a doctor-patient relationship. This was an employer-employee relationship. And that fundamental corruption of that relationship forms the foundation of every single act that Conrad Murray took, because he was not acting as a doctor with Michael's best interests at heart. He was not acting as an informed medical doctor trying to put his patient first. He deceived the paramedics. Again, that relates to the consciousness of guilt, but it's criminal negligence, it's unethical, it's unconscionable. He deceived UCLA medical personnel. Again, it's consciousness of guilt, but it's also unethical, unconscionable, and an extreme deviation from the standard of care. Now, we heard also about these simulations. And I want to talk about this briefly. You heard from Dr. Steve Schaefer, one of the premier experts in computer modeling and computer simulations. And there is some speculation as to what transpired, because we have no medical records. Michael Jackson is dead. So working backwards, Dr. Schaefer tried to piece together the most likely scenario based on the science, based on the prior conduct of Conrad Murray, based on the evidence recovered at the scene. And in Dr. Schaefer's expert opinion, who is well published in pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, anesthesiologist at Columbia University, just received a lifetime award in his field. Based on the blood levels and all the available evidence, the most likely scenario to him is that an infusion was running, Nothing extraordinary or unusual about that. That is what Conrad Murray said he had done nearly every night for the past 2 months. An infusion was running. At some point, respiratory depression took hold. Michael stopped breathing. And at some point along that continuum of time, while the infusion is still dripping into him, he dies. And in that scenario, it explains the femoral blood levels of 2.6. But what we also know is that it's based on the propofol shipments, these massive amounts of propofol that are being shipped to Conrad Murray at his girlfriend's apartment. It's based on the prior conduct that Conrad Murray, he himself states he was doing, 50 milligram boluses followed by a drip on all these prior occasions. And it's based on People's 30 and People's 29, the cut saline bag. Now think about People's 30 for a moment. Again, this is the one that has Conrad Murray's fingerprint on it. It is a stipulated fact. It is a fact that this label, this hanging tab, was unused and intact on June 25th, 2009. Now, they tend to reapply themselves, but this is a fact that has been stipulated by the people and the defense, that this hanging tab was unused and intact on June 25th, 2009. Well, Dr. White himself testified that this is a spike hole on top, that this hole is from a spike, an infusion line spike. This bottle was hung upside down with a spike in it. And it's a stipulated fact that this plastic hanging tab was unused and intact on June 25th, 2009. Does it seem that extraordinary or unusual that this had been placed in the cut saline bag that Alberto Alvarez saw and that Alyssa Fleek recovered from the blue Costco bag? This plastic tab was not used. This, according to Dr. White, is a spike hole. This was spiked with an infusion line. It had to have been upside down to drain through that spike hole. The only reasonable interpretation of the evidence is that it was because it was hanging in that saline bag. Now, if you remember in the interview of Conrad Murray relates that Michael Jackson always wanted him to put the things away. He wanted him to put his bags up in the cabinet. Conrad Murray says Michael Jackson told him where to put them in that upper cabinet because he didn't want things laying around. Maybe this was Michael Jackson's idea, that somehow this would conceal it a little bit to be inside of a bag. Not very well. We don't know. There are no medical records, and Michael Jackson is dead. But it is a fact that that tab was not used. It is a fact, according to Dr. White himself, that a spike, an infusion spike, was put into that bottle, and we know that the bottle is essentially empty and has been drained through a spike hole as it hung upside down. And we also know that bottle has the fingerprint of Conrad Murray. So when the defense questioned Dr. Schaefer about this extraordinary interpretation of the facts, this is what Conrad Murray was doing every night, according to himself. Running an infusion, a drip, he called it. 50 milligram bolus followed by a drip. And it explains the blood levels. It's consistent with, if you look at the phone records of what Conrad Murray was doing, if you believe that at 9:20 he's on the phone doing emails, Michael Jackson's not laying there complaining about sleep. Conrad Murray would have to just literally be ignoring him then. Conrad Murray's his employee. You'd have to believe that Michael's laying there saying, "Doctor, put me to sleep," and Conrad Murray's just either not in the room at all or just ignoring him, making phone calls, sending text messages, reading emails. The likely scenario is Michael Jackson was asleep, hooked up to this drip, and Conrad Murray grew so distracted, was either in the room, out of the room. Dr. White says, under his scenario, where